The unexpected encounter. The wind howled through the desolate landscape, a fierce storm that seemed to never end. Snowflakes swirled in the air, carried by the relentless gusts that bit through any clothing. The sky was a dull grey, a reflection of the harsh world below. In the midst of this frozen wasteland, a lone figure trudged through the snow, his face covered by a thick scarf, his eyes squinting against the wind. He was a warrior, tall and strong, wrapped in heavy armor that seemed to have weathered many battles. His name was Kael, and he had wandered far from the safety of his village, seeking solitude, peace, and a purpose. But today, the storm had swallowed him whole. The path he had been following had vanished beneath the thick blanket of snow, and now he was lost, struggling to find shelter from the brutal cold. As Kael made his way forward, his boots crunching through the thick snow, he saw something strange ahead. It was faint at first, barely noticeable against the white landscape. But as he drew closer, he could see it clearly, a small, delicate figure lying on the ground. The figure was barely visible, almost blending into the snow itself. His heart raced as he approached, his mind questioning what he saw. Was it a traveler, lost like him, or perhaps an animal seeking refuge? Kael's breath caught in his chest when he realized it was a young girl. She lay motionless, her small body shivering, her skin an unnatural shade of blue. He dropped to his knees beside her, heart pounding in his chest. "What in the world?" he murmured, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. The girl's body was cold to the touch, colder than anything Kael had ever felt before. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her small, pointed ears peeked out from beneath long, silvery hair. She was unlike anything Kael had ever seen. In the distance, the storm raged on, but in this small moment, time seemed to stand still. Kael's mind raced with thoughts. Was she human? Where had she come from? And why was she out here, alone, in such a harsh environment? He gently cradled her in his arms, his eyes scanning the snow-covered landscape for any sign of where she might have come from. There was no sign of a settlement, no footprints in the snow, nothing that made sense. She seemed to have appeared out of nowhere as Kael lifted her carefully. He noticed her chest rising and falling, though faintly. She was alive, but barely. His eyes widened as he realized the severity of the situation. The storm would not allow him to stand still for long. He had to get her to shelter, but where? The blizzard had consumed everything in sight, leaving no clear path to safety. Instinctively, Kael turned and began walking back the way he had come, hoping that somehow, by some miracle, he would find some refuge from the storm. His breath came in sharp bursts as he pushed through the wind and snow. The weight of the girl in his arms was heavy, but he didn't dare stop. Every second was crucial. As he moved forward, he could feel the cold creeping into his bones, making it harder to breathe. The girl's tiny body was almost too cold to hold. Kael's concern for her grew with every passing minute. What if she didn't make it? What if she was too far gone already? But as the storm raged on, he couldn't help but wonder, who was she? How had she ended up here in this vast, inhospitable wilderness? And why was she so different? His thoughts were interrupted by a strange sensation, something warm against his chest. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, or perhaps the cold was making him dizzy. But then he felt it again, a faint pulse of warmth radiating from the girl. Kael stopped in his tracks, looking down at her. Her blue skin seemed to glow faintly, as though some strange energy was slowly coursing through her. Her hair shimmered, and for a brief moment, Kael swore he saw her eyes flicker open. A soft, almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. "Help," she murmured, her voice weak but filled with an unspoken desperation. Kael's heart skipped a beat. He had never heard anything like it before. Her voice was delicate, almost otherworldly, and it stirred something deep inside him. He looked around, scanning the landscape once again for shelter. There had to be somewhere, anything that could protect them from the storm. He couldn't leave her here, not now, not when she had spoken to him, even in such a fragile state. With renewed determination, Kael moved forward once more, his grip on her tightening, willing himself to find safety. As the snow continued to fall, the world around him seemed to blur. But in his arms, the tiny girl held on, her body beginning to warm ever so slightly. The storm raged on. But Kael knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, he would not abandon her. The mysterious girl Kael's steps grew heavier as he trudged through the thick snow, but he didn't dare stop. His arms were aching from holding the fragile girl, but his mind was focused solely on finding shelter. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and every gust of wind seemed to threaten to steal away his resolve. As he moved through the snow, he noticed something strange. The girl, who had been so cold and unresponsive when he first found her, was now stirring slightly. Her skin, once an icy blue, seemed to be warming, faint traces of pink returning to her cheeks. She was alive, more than alive, in fact. There was something otherworldly about her. Her hair shimmered in the dim light, silver strands sparkling like stardust, and her faintly glowing skin was now warmer to the touch. The strange warmth he had felt earlier seemed to be growing, as if she were drawing energy from somewhere deep within. Kael felt a mix of awe and worry. How was this possible? "Are you all right?" Kael whispered, his voice low and careful as he looked down at her, hoping she could hear him. The girl's eyes fluttered open, revealing bright, glowing irises that reflected the light in strange patterns. For a brief moment, she gazed up at him, her expression one of confusion and fear. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She tried to move, but her small body trembled, exhausted from the harsh cold. Kael lowered her gently, kneeling in the snow and positioning her so she was propped up against his arm. She was still too weak to sit on her own, but the warmth radiating from her body seemed to fill the space between them. "Don't worry," Kael said softly, trying to comfort her. "We'll find somewhere safe. Just hang on." The girl blinked. Slowly, her eyes meeting his. She didn't speak, but her expression seemed to soften, and her body relaxed a little in his arms. Kael looked around, his eyes scanning the horizon. The storm had reduced visibility to almost nothing, but in the distance. He thought he saw something, a dark shape, a slight break in the endless white. His heart quickened with hope. It could be a cave, a shelter of some kind, perhaps a chance. To escape the storm with determination, Kael began moving again, the girl's body pressed gently against his chest. As they approached the dark shape, Kael realized it was indeed a cave, tucked beneath a rocky outcrop that had shielded it from the worst of the snow. With the last of his strength, Kael carried the girl inside, the warmth of the cave a welcome contrast to the brutal cold outside. He found a spot near the back of the cave and gently laid her down on the ground, brushing some snow from her hair. For a moment, Kael simply watched her, trying to make sense of everything. Who was she? What was she doing out here? Why was she so different from anyone he had ever met? The girl's breathing was shallow but steady, and the strange warmth continued to radiate from her body. Her skin, now an almost ethereal glow, contrasted with the rough surroundings of the cave. Kael reached into his pack and pulled out a small fire-starting kit. It didn't take long to get a small flame going, and soon the cave was filled with a soft, flickering warmth. Kael sat near the fire, watching the girl closely, trying to calm his racing thoughts. After a long silence, the girl's voice broke through, weak but clear. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kael looked at her, startled by the sound of her voice. It wasn't just soft. It had an unusual quality, as if it came from somewhere far beyond the world they were in. "You're in a cave," Kael replied, keeping his tone gentle. "Safe from the storm. I found you in the snow. He hesitated. "You were cold, too cold." The girl blinked, confusion still in her eyes. She raised a hand slowly to her face, as if feeling her own skin for the first time. "Don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't be here." Kael's heart skipped a beat. Her words sent a chill through him, despite the warmth of the fire. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quiet but full of concern. She paused for a moment, as if trying to gather her thoughts. I don't belong here," she said, slowly, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "I shouldn't have come." Her words only deepened the mystery surrounding her. Who was she? How did she end up in this frozen wasteland? And why did it feel like there was something about her that Kael couldn't quite understand, something that made her feel different from anyone he had ever met? "Don't worry," Kael said, shaking his head, trying to reassure her. "We'll figure it out. You're safe now." The girl looked at him, and for the first time, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She didn't speak, but her expression softened, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Kael watched her closely, his mind racing with questions, but for now, he knew there was one thing he could offer her: safety. They were far from the storm now, and for the first time in a long while, Kael allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that neither of them could have predicted. The promise of hope. The storm raged outside, but the small cave that had taken them in offered the only semblance of safety. Kael kept the fire burning, the flickering light dancing across the walls, casting long shadows in every corner. The girl, still lying against the rocky floor, was quiet for a long time. Her breathing had evened out, but her eyes, those strange, glowing eyes, never seemed to stop searching the shadows. Kael, who had been keeping a watchful eye on her, felt a strange connection between them, one he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the fact that she was unlike anyone he had ever seen, no. It was something deeper, something more unsettling. There was a pull between them, an invisible thread that seemed to tie their fates together. He stood up and walked toward the fire, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that something was coming, something he wasn't prepared for. As he gathered some dry wood to keep the fire strong, he turned to the girl, his voice soft. "Do you remember anything? Anything at all?" he asked. His question was gentle, as though he was trying not to push too hard. The girl's eyes met his, and for a moment it seemed as if she was studying him, trying to decipher something from his expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but paused as if the words were difficult to find. I don't remember," she whispered, her voice faint, like a breeze in the wind. "But I know I was supposed to be somewhere. I don't know why I'm here." Her words sent a shiver down Kael's spine. The uncertainty in her voice was unmistakable. And yet there was something else, something that made Kael think that she wasn't just lost physically, but that there was some deeper reason for her being here. Kael knelt beside her, setting down the firewood as he looked at her closely. Her glowing skin, her strange appearance, it was all so unfamiliar to him. Nothing about her seemed to fit into the world he knew, yet she was here in his care. And in that moment, he made a promise to her, though he couldn't fully explain. "Why, I'll keep you safe," Kael said, his voice steady and filled with resolve. "I don't know where you come from or what brought you here, but I'll make sure you get through this." The girl blinked slowly, her large, bright eyes watching him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. There was a flicker of hope in her gaze, and Kael felt his heart tighten. Why would you do that for me?" she asked softly, as if trying to understand his motives. "I don't even know who I am. How can you trust me?" Kael hesitated, his brow furrowing in thought. Why had he done it? Why had he chosen to help her when he didn't even know who she was? The answer wasn't easy, but he felt it deep within himself. "Because I can't just leave you out there," he said, his voice low but firm. "And because, somehow, I believe you're meant to be here. I don't know why, but I feel it." The girl was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Then she nodded faintly, as though accepting his promise. "I don't know where I belong," she whispered, almost to herself. "But I want to find out. I want to know who I am." Kael's heart softened at the sound of her voice, and for the first time since he found her, he saw the girl not just as a mysterious, fragile being, but as someone who was lost, but searching for her place in this vast, cold world. He looked down at her, his thoughts drifting to the life he had lived. He had always been a warrior, a protector. He was used to fighting for survival, for people he cared about. But this was different. This wasn't a fight against an enemy, but a fight to understand the unknown. A fight to offer hope where none seemed to exist. "Maybe we're both looking for something," Kael murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we're both searching for a reason to keep going." The girl's eyes met his again, and this time there was something new in her gaze, a glimmer of trust, a glimmer of hope. It was small, but it was enough. "I'll help you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear still present in her eyes. "I don't know how, but I will. You're not alone." Kael's chest tightened, but not from fear. It was something else, a feeling of warmth spreading through him, as if her words had melted the coldness that had settled in his heart. He nodded, though he didn't know what their journey would look like or what challenges lay ahead. But one thing was certain, he wouldn't let her face this alone. And as they sat there, in the warmth of the fire, Kael couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for both of them. Was this truly the beginning of something greater, something that neither of them understood? Or were they both just lost souls, drifting in a storm, waiting for a reason to hope? One thing was clear: the promise he made to keep her safe, to help her find herself, was a vow that Kael would hold to, no matter what dangers lay ahead. They were no longer just strangers in the snow. They were connected, and together they would find the answers they sought. A glimmer of strength, the fire crackled and popped, sending a warm, steady glow into the shadows of the cave. The storm outside was still relentless, its howling winds and swirling snow now a distant roar as Kael and the girl huddled together. In the safety of their shelter, despite the warmth of the fire, Kael couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He glanced over at the girl, who had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep. Her breathing had steadied, and the faint glow that had once emanated from her skin had begun to pulse rhythmically, like the beat of a heart. Her silver hair shimmered in the flickering light, and for a moment she appeared almost ethereal, more than human, as if she belonged to some distant, otherworldly realm. Kael couldn't help but wonder what she was, who she was. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and yet there was something about her that felt familiar. As he stared at her, his mind racing with questions, he suddenly noticed a subtle change. The air around her seemed to shift. It wasn't the temperature, it was something deeper, something that made the very atmosphere hum with energy. The girl's body twitched slightly, and then, with a soft gasp, she awoke. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly as they adjusted to the light of the fire. For a moment, she simply lay there, staring up at Kael, confusion clouding her expression. "Are you all right?" Kael asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. "You were asleep for a while." The girl slowly pushed herself up, her limbs shaky but determined. I'm fine," she whispered, but Kael could see the uncertainty in her eyes. There was something she wasn't saying. Kael didn't press her. Instead, he sat down beside her, trying to offer her some sense of comfort. He could feel the warmth of her body radiating in waves, a strange and comforting heat that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The girl looked down at her hands, which were now glowing with a soft, bluish light. Her gaze lifted to meet his. "I don't know what's happening to me," she said quietly, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "I can feel it, like something is waking inside me. It's growing stronger." Kael's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean?" She closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to gather her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with a quiet power. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel connected to something. It's as if this place, this world is pulling something out of me. My energy is ... changing, and I don't know how to control it." The girl's hands began to glow brighter as she spoke, a swirling, ethereal light spiraling around her fingers. Kael's eyes widened in awe, his breath catching in his throat. He could feel the energy in the air growing stronger, filling the cave with an almost tangible force. "Be careful," Kael said, his voice tense. "I don't want you to hurt yourself." The girl nodded, but her expression was conflicted. She looked down at her glowing hands, then back at Kael. "I don't understand. I've never felt this before. I never knew I could do something like this." Kael studied her carefully, his mind racing. Could she have powers that he didn't know about, powers beyond anything human? It was clear that whatever she wasn't like the people Kael had known in his life. But what did it mean? And why was she here, in this place, with him? Before Kael could speak, the girl closed her eyes again, and for a moment, the cave grew unnaturally still. Kael leaned forward, instinctively preparing for anything to happen. The girl's breath deepened, and then, with a sudden burst of light, a small, glowing orb of energy appeared in her hands. The orb floated above her palms, flickering like a tiny star in the darkness. Kael stared at it, transfixed by the sheer power it radiated. The orb shimmered, its glow casting strange, flickering shadows across the cave walls. The girl's face was bathed in its light, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. I don't know how to control it," she said, her voice trembling. "It's like a part of me, but I can't stop it." Kael, ever the protector, instinctively moved closer, offering his hand. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out together." For a long moment, The girl stared at his outstretched hand. Then, hesitantly, she reached out and placed her palm against his. As soon as their skin made contact, the orb in her hands flickered once more before dimming. The strange energy slowly faded, and the warmth around them began to lessen. The girl's breathing grew shallow again as the power within her seemed to retreat, leaving her feeling weak and exhausted. "I don't understand," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "What is this? Why can't I control it?" Kael's heart softened. He could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty of a power she didn't understand. He wanted to tell her that it was okay, that everything would be fine, but he didn't know how. He didn't know anything about the power she wielded or what it meant for their future. But one thing was clear: they were connected, and together they would face whatever came next. "Whatever happens," Kael said softly, his voice filled with resolve, "I'll be here. You're not alone. We'll figure it out." The girl's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in her gaze, a glimmer of hope. For the first time, she believed him. The hidden threat, the fire flickered softly in the cave, casting long shadows on the walls. The girl, now more settled but still exhausted, lay quietly near the warmth, her body still glowing faintly as if the strange energy within her had not yet fully receded. Kael sat by the entrance of the cave, keeping watch over the storm outside, which showed no signs of abating. His mind was a whirlwind, trying to piece together the mysteries of the girl and the strange powers she held. The wind howled through the narrow opening, and Kael's thoughts kept drifting back to the events that had unfolded in the last few hours. The girl's powers, the orb of energy, the way she had changed before his eyes, all of it was beyond his understanding. But one thing was clear: she wasn't just any traveler. There was something otherworldly about her, something he couldn't ignore. He glanced over at her, seeing the faint glow from her body still emanating softly. Even in her weakened state, there was an undeniable sense of power within her. It was a power that seemed untamed, wild, and yet fragile. Kael shook his head, trying to focus. They couldn't stay in this cave forever. They needed to move, to find out where they were and what lay beyond the storm. But as much as he wanted to escape the frozen wasteland, he knew they couldn't leave just yet. His thoughts were interrupted by a low rumbling sound, something he had barely noticed at first, but it grew louder, more distinct. Kael froze, his senses sharpening. He stood up slowly, trying not to disturb the girl, and moved cautiously toward the mouth of the cave. The sound was unmistakable now, heavy, rhythmic thumping, like the pounding of feet. Kael's heart raced. He stepped closer to the entrance, peering out into the swirling snow. The world beyond the cave was a blur of white, but he could make out dark shapes moving through the storm. Large, hulking figures, their shadows stretching long across the snow. Kael's instincts kicked in. He knew they were in danger. Someone was out there, and they weren't friendly. He quickly turned back toward the girl, who was still lying near the fire, her body trembling with the lingering effects of her powers. He couldn't leave her, not now, but if those figures came any closer, he wouldn't be able to protect them both. The rumbling grew louder. There was no time to waste. Kael rushed over to the girl, gently shaking her shoulder to wake her. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at him in confusion. "What's happening?" she asked weakly, her voice still full of exhaustion. "We need to move," Kael said urgently, pulling her to her feet. "There are people, dangerous people, outside. I don't know who they are, but they're coming this way. We need to leave, now. The girl's eyes widened as she slowly pushed herself up, her body still weak from the exertion earlier. She reached out to steady herself, but Kael was already pulling her toward the back of the cave. He grabbed his pack and slung it over his shoulder, glancing outside again. The figures were getting closer, their movements growing more deliberate. They'll find us if we stay here too long, Kael muttered. He looked down at the girl, who was struggling to keep up, her small frame barely able to handle the weight of her own power, let alone the strain of running. I can help, she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. I can protect us. Kael shook his head. Not like this. You're not strong enough yet. You need to rest. I'll keep you safe. Just stay close. The girl's eyes filled with a mix of frustration and fear, but she nodded, following him as they made their way through the cave's narrow passageway, moving deeper into the mountain. Kael's heart pounded in his chest as the rumbling grew. Louder, closer. Suddenly, the girl stopped. She stood still, her eyes scanning the shadows, a look of concentration on her face. Kael turned to her, confused. What is it? He asked, his voice tense. I can feel them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They're close. I don't know who they are, but they're coming. They're not human. I can feel their power. Kael's breath caught in his throat. He had already suspected they weren't dealing with ordinary people, but hearing it confirmed by the girl sent a chill down his spine. They were being hunted by something much darker than he could have imagined. What do we do? Kael asked urgently. How do we escape? The girl closed her eyes, her face pale with strain as she tried to focus. I don't know. My powers are still new. I can't control them fully. Kael grabbed her shoulders gently, trying to calm her down. Listen to me. We need to move. We can't let them find us. I'll protect you. But just as he finished speaking, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The rumbling outside had intensified, and the cave itself seemed to respond, shaking with the force of something massive approaching. We don't have much time, Kael said, his voice urgent. We need to go now. The girl nodded, her expression filled with a mix of fear and determination. Together, they moved deeper into the cave, away from the approaching threat. But Kael couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whoever or whatever was hunting them wasn't going to give up easily, and they would need to face the darkness ahead if they hoped to survive. The storm outside raged on, but within the cave, the only sound was the pounding of Kael's heart, and the soft rustling of the girl's breath as they prepared for the battle that was sure to come. The final battle. The cave had grown eerily quiet as Kael and the girl made their way deeper into the winding passages. The rumbling outside had stopped, but Kael knew it wasn't over. The presence of the approaching figures, something far beyond ordinary, still lingered in the air, thick with danger. His instincts told him they were getting closer, and the urgency to escape was becoming overwhelming. As they ventured further into the cave, the girl's steps grew slower. She was still weak from the power she had unleashed, and Kael could see the strain on her face. She was pushing herself, but how much longer could she hold on? Are you okay? Kael asked, glancing at her with concern. We need to keep moving. I'll be fine, the girl replied through gritted teeth, her voice tight with effort. I just need to rest for a moment. They paused for a brief moment, Kael scanning the shadows around them, his senses alert. The faintest whisper of wind slipped through cracks in the cave, and Kael couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He felt it deep in his bones, the weight of an unseen enemy, The girl, sensing his anxiety, stood up straighter, her hand resting on his arm. "Kael, they're coming," she whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "I can feel them. They're not far now." Kael's breath hitched. He had hoped for more time, but the approaching presence was undeniable. The figures, whatever they were, had found them. "I don't know how much time we have," he muttered, pulling her towards a narrow path leading further into the cave. "Stay close to me. We'll find a way to stop them." The girl nodded, her body glowing faintly, still weak but showing signs of the energy she had used before. She was trying to control it, but Kael could see the struggle in her eyes. This wasn't something she could fight alone, and it seemed the time had come for them to face the unknown together. Just as they rounded a corner in the cave, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the passage. It was a sound unlike anything Kael had ever heard, a mix of rage and hunger that made his blood run cold. The ground trembled under their feet, and in the dim light, Kael caught sight of them creatures with glowing red eyes, massive and intimidating, their bodies built for destruction. "Kael," the girl whispered, her voice shaking. "We have to stop them. I can feel their power. It's unlike anything I've ever sensed." Kael turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "You're not alone in this. We'll face them together." As the creatures advanced, Kael stepped forward, positioning himself between them and the girl. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, the familiar weight comforting him in the face of the unknown. But as he prepared for a fight, he could feel the girl's energy beginning to stir once again. "Get ready," Kael said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "This is it." The girl took a deep breath, her glowing hands trembling slightly. She stepped beside Kael, trying to summon whatever power lay within her. The creatures were closing in, and there was no turning back. The first creature lunged, its massive claws swiping through the air with terrifying speed. Kael blocked the blow, his sword meeting the creature's claws with a deafening clash. But the creature was strong, too strong. Kael barely managed to keep his footing as it pushed him back. "Kael," the girl cried, her voice desperate. "I can't hold it back much longer." Kael gritted his teeth, struggling to maintain control. "Focus, we can do this together." The girl closed her eyes, her body trembling as she summoned every ounce of power left inside her. The air around them began to shimmer, crackling with energy. She stretched out her hands, and from her palms, a wave of blue light erupted, shooting forward and engulfing the creature. The light crackled as it collided with the beast, sending it reeling back with a deafening roar. The creature snarled, disoriented but still alive, its red eyes glaring at them with malice. But the girl wasn't finished. She raised her hands again, her energy swirling violently as she summoned a new wave of power. This time, it wasn't just light, it was something else, something darker. Kael watched, his heart pounding, as the girl's power twisted and coiled around her. The very air around them seemed to warp with her energy, creating a shield of pure force that pushed the creature back, further into the cave. For a moment, Kael thought they had one, but the creature wasn't alone. More figures appeared from the shadows, emerging from the darkness like phantoms. The girl's energy flickered, and Kael could see the strain in her eyes. They were surrounded. "We're not going to make it," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Kael turned to her, his grip tightening on his sword. "Yes, we are. We're not alone, remember." The girl's eyes met his, and for a brief moment they both realized the truth, the bond between them, forged in this moment of crisis, was their greatest weapon. Together, they would face whatever came their way. Kael stepped forward, raising his sword high. "For you," he said, his voice filled with determination. "And for us." In a single motion, he charged forward, his sword cutting through the air as he struck down the first creature, the blade slicing through its dark skin with a satisfying crunch. The girl followed, her energy crackling and lighting up the cave. Like a beacon, her powers, though still fragile, were growing stronger with every passing moment. She fought alongside him, her movements graceful yet powerful as she defended them both from the creatures closing in. The battle raged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. But Kael could feel if the tide was turning. The creatures were retreating, their roars echoing through the cave as they backed away, their bodies smoking from the girl's relentless attacks. With one final burst of energy, the girl unleashed a powerful wave of force, sending the remaining creatures fleeing into the darkness. The cave fell silent, save for their labored breathing. Kael stood panting, his body aching, but he was alive. They were alive. The girl collapsed to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," she whispered, her voice soft with disbelief. Kael knelt beside her, his heart still racing. "We did," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You did it. You saved us." And in that moment, Kael realized that this was only the beginning. The girl was no longer just a stranger in a storm. She was his ally, his companion, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm outside still raged, but inside the cave, there was a new hope, one they had created together. And Kael knew that as long as they stood side by side, nothing could break the bond they had formed. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. But the journey was far from over. A new beginning, the storm outside had softened to a gentle murmur, the once deafening winds now a distant hum. Inside the cave, the fire crackled and popped, the warmth enveloping Kael and the girl as they sat in the stillness of their shared victory. Though they were both exhausted, the weight of their recent battle still hung in the air. They had faced down something far more dangerous than either of them had expected, but they had made it through. Together, Kael sat beside her, watching the fire as it flickered, its light dancing across the walls in rhythmic patterns. The girl, though physically drained, seemed to glow brighter with each passing moment. Her power had grown stronger since they had first met, and Kael could feel it, the deep, raw energy she now carried within her. "We did it," Kael murmured, his voice low with a mixture of relief and pride. He had never been so grateful to survive a battle in his life. The girl didn't respond right away. She was staring into the fire, her expression thoughtful, as if reflecting on everything that had happened. Kael glanced at her, noting the solemnity in her eyes. There was something different about her, now something more certain, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "I didn't know if I could do it," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't know if I had the strength to fight back. But with you here, I felt like I could do anything." Kael looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You didn't just fight back, you protected us. You saved us both." Her face softened, and she finally turned her gaze to him. "We saved each other," she replied quietly, her eyes locking with his. Kael was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. There was so much more he wanted to ask. So many things he still didn't understand about her power, and about their future. But for now, in the warmth of the cave, with the storm outside finally calming, he found peace in simply Being in her presence, "You've changed," Kael said, almost to himself, as he studied her closely. "When I found you, you were ... different, fragile, but now you're stronger than I ever could have imagined." The girl's lips curved into a small smile, but there was sadness in her eyes, a quiet sorrow. "I don't know who I was before," she said, her voice filled with a sense of loss. "I don't remember anything. I don't know where I came from, or why I have this power." Kael felt a pang of sympathy for her. He understood what it was like to be lost, to have no answers. He had spent most of his life wandering, searching for meaning, searching for a purpose. He knew that feeling all too well. "Maybe you don't need to know everything right now," Kael said gently. "What matters is that you're here, and you're not alone anymore. We'll figure it out together." The girl's eyes brightened slightly at his words, the weight of her isolation easing just a little. "Together," she repeated, as though the word was something new, something precious. "I like the sound of that." Kael stood up slowly, stretching his arms to shake off the lingering tension from the battle. The girl followed suit, though she was still somewhat weak. "I think it's time we leave this cave," Kael said, offering her a hand to help her rise. "The storm's past, and we've got a journey ahead of us." The girl nodded, accepting his hand as she stood with his support. She seemed to gather herself, her energy returning little by little, though it was clear she still needed time to regain her full strength. Kael packed up their belongings, his movements steady and practiced. The girl lingered for a moment, looking out of the cave's mouth, as if she was trying to glimpse what lay beyond the mountain's shadow. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly, almost as if she was speaking to herself. Kael paused, looking out at the world beyond. The sun had begun to rise, its light filtering through the clouds in soft, golden rays, painting the snow with hues of pink and orange. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was still and quiet, a world full of possibilities. "I don't know," Kael admitted, "but we'll figure it out, together." The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust and gratitude. "Together," she repeated, her voice steady. With that, Kael and the girl walked out of the cave, stepping into the new day, into the unknown. The journey ahead was uncertain, and they both knew the road would not be easy. But they had each other now, and that made all the difference. The bond between them was unbreakable, forged in fire, in battle, and in the quiet moments they had shared. As they walked forward, side by side, the world around them seemed full of hope that neither of them had known before. They weren't alone anymore. They had found something in each other that gave them strength. And together, they would face whatever challenges the world had in store. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was just the beginning.